That seems to all be functioning correctly now, Maren.
Awesome. So welcome to anybody watching on YouTube as well. We can't see your chat, unfortunately, just the people on Zoom, but it looks like we've got people from all over the US and some other places like France, which is very cool.
I ran away to go pee. What'd I miss?
Nothing. I'm going to lock my door though. Rumi thinks it's time to come in.
Is anybody here, and sorry if Maren asked this already, is anybody here already a doula? If so, pop that in the chat. And is anybody an aspiring doula? Just a little bit about your interest in this topic today, the role of the indie birth doula. Excellent, not a doula yet, but an aspiring one, and have been a doula since 2003 and now in the indie birth midwifery school. Very exciting, yes, so glad you're here. Aspiring doula, already enrolled in your course. Another aspiring doula, and I'm a few weeks into the doula program. Awesome. Yes, welcome aspiring doulas. So great to have you here. It's very exciting.
All right, well, continue to write that kind of stuff in the chat if you'd like. I usually do some kind of card or something in the beginning, so I will do that because I got a new fun deck this past week. It's the full moon in Sagittarius, which is very fun, and that's where my moon placement is. So this is fun. And Margot too. I know, I was so excited about this full moon that I thought it was like on Thursday. I was so confused. Like, no, I just was anticipating it. So it's today. So first, if you're able, I see a lot of cameras off and that's fine. But if you're able to show your face, that's always so nice. And so for everybody that's visible, I'm just taking a couple seconds and looking at all the beautiful faces here. Just kind of seeing what feels good, maybe connecting, maybe being curious about somebody you see, just feeling that in your own body right now. And just feeling into anything that's coming up for you today on this full moon. It doesn't have to be anything birth related, but notice how you're feeling in your body. Just take these couple of seconds if you're able. Notice if your body needs anything. If you're having thoughts of later today, any emotions or feelings that are just coming up. And just breathing or taking some breaths or getting your feet on the ground. I see some people driving, so probably not the time for that, but just kind of like grounding yourself in your own environment, in your car, in your room, so that you can be as present as possible, that we all can be as present as possible for this funny online meeting. I mean, they're so great, but also everybody's like living their own life right now, which is so odd in some ways, right? Like if we were all sitting together in a circle, we'd have that in common, and we don't. So that's kind of the purpose, is to orient yourself in your body. And Joni, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, in those couple of seconds of checking in with your own body, your own self, you can have stuff just immediately come up, and it might feel really great and it might not feel really great, but you just haven't given yourself the little bit of time to allow that to surface. And I feel like that's so helpful. So even if it means later you come back to whatever you're feeling, whatever you've noticed, consider that a gift of this meeting and this full moon, to just have that awareness. Also, just a really great practice to do with the women we're serving if you're a doula. Just starting your meetings like this. How are you feeling in your body right now? And whatever comes up for someone is valid. So I'll pull a card on that note, feeling more grounded myself. Okay, so it's a really fun deck. It's actually one of the most favorite ones I've ever had so far. I'll show you. That's called Sacred Rebels. And Elena Fairchild is the author of this deck, and she has a bunch of decks, and I have a lot of them, and I really like them, but this one is really, really special. And so since we're all sacred rebels here, I thought it would be fun to pick one. Let's see, what shall we sit with today? Oh, cool. I have not picked this one yet, so I'll have to look in the book, but it's number 34. I'll try and back it up. In the world, not of the world, which is always a cool concept, right? Even the exercise we kind of just did wasn't really a formal exercise, but just realizing that your body is here in the now, in this moment, in all its glory. But your higher self, your soul, is not really of this world. So having that dichotomy in your own self is a cool thing, I think, about being human. So let me quickly see what the card says for us. Okay, in the world, not of the world. I'll kind of summarize because it's a long thing to read. It is safe for you to become naked with life. So this doesn't necessarily mean stripping off and running wild in public. It does mean stripping back your beliefs, strongholds, and mental or emotional security blankets so that you can live with less obstruction than ever before. Imagine the conditioning that has kept life away from you, just kept it dropping out of your hands like keys, coins, or clocks. So conditioned belief like around money, time, security. What would it be like to feel as though you were on holiday every day? Skipping ahead. This oracle comes as a message to you. Sometimes we need our defenses. At other times, it is clear we are outgrowing them. There is something that you have outgrown. It has to do with your ideas about productivity, time, control, and money. It has to do with abundance, trust, and living with the fundamental belief that everything is going to turn out okay. You are ready to be much more vulnerable and exposed in life. You don't have to hide behind being organized, perfect, or financially secure. You don't need any other acceptable social face. So being guided to trust, letting go, all of those things kind of come in. And yeah, so that's the card. I'll show it one more time. But it's very pretty. So maybe changing where you feel security and all of that great stuff. So take it if it resonates, leave it if it doesn't. We don't care. But there you go. Thank you to these cards. They're so beautiful.
Someone in the chat said, I just had this conversation last night with my best friend. If you have thoughts or things you want to share over in the chat, you're welcome to, if anything came up for you from that card in general, or as it relates to this role of the doula. I haven't seen that one. Thanks for showing us that, Miriam.
Yeah, I bet you'd love this deck. It's really, really like special. And the cards are all just like have been so perfect. So, anyways.
Excellent.
Yeah, I mean, this is a perfect one, I think, for what we're talking about, just about conditioned beliefs and acceptable roles and identity. There's so much about the doula role that we as a culture here, at least Western culture, kind of conditioned to think or believe. So we could start with that or anything really.
Yeah, let's start with that. Maybe some of the things that we're conditioned to believe about the doula role. Gosh, where to start?
Anybody have any thoughts or feelings on that? Maybe you've been in that role before, or maybe you've hired a doula. Like, what's kind of out there in the world as the purpose? And, does that match with what you feel your purpose might be? I know for me, and I've shared many times before, so I'm sure many of you have heard this, I never became a doula before going the midwife route. And, if I was starting that journey now and I knew what I did now, maybe I would have, because I didn't realize back then that being a doula could mean so much more. So to me, back then, that wasn't something I was interested in because it seemed really difficult in ways that I didn't want to put effort in. It seemed to me like the role of the doula was to often enable women to make choices that weren't really the best for them. So I'm not saying that's what it is, but that's what I thought it was back then.
And I think there's still a lot of conversation about that now. Like things have certainly shifted and changed in ways, but there's still sort of a split in the doula world around people who feel like a doula can and should or should not sort of like call women out on the cognitive dissonance that they have going on, or when they're making choices that are sort of in direct opposition to what they had said that they wanted. So there's definitely sort of at least two camps, if not more, of course, since things are complex, but there's still that wing, I would say, or camp in the doula community that feels like questioning a woman's choices or, bringing up some of those hard conversations is not within the realm of the doula role. And then there are people like us who feel like it certainly is, and that there's so much we can do ahead of time to try to prevent that from happening in the birth space specifically, since it can be unproductive to be having those conversations while someone's in labor, right? This actually came up interestingly in our midwifery school. One of our cohorts, I won't share a bunch of details or names or anything, but we have these lovely little cohorts for people. And I have to get a new phone. I think today, Marin, today is the day. I know I've been saying this for a while. Like it's just locked sideways. Like it won't flip now, and it just like dies randomly. Anyways, I was gonna pull it up if it will function. But basically, we have a really lovely midwifery school student who was at a birth as a doula, and some of this stuff came up around like, this mama saying she wanted one thing, but then, and someone messaged me over here sort of directly in the chat too. It's a similar situation where a mama says they want one thing and then they start going down this path with the cascade of interventions, buying into what's being told to them, even though it's maybe not even evidence-based, let alone like heart or spirit-based information. And like, what do we do then in that situation as the doula? Do we say hey and point it out, or do we just sort of like get drug along for the ride? And there's not a right or wrong answer, but at indie birth, we don't see your role as just being drug along for the ride. Spoiler alert. I was gonna find an actual example. Maybe, oh, it's functioning now. I'll see if I can find it, Maren. But if you want to go ahead while I do that, that's totally cool.
Yeah, well, there's people at different stages of this journey here. So for women that are considering the doula role, it's easiest in some ways to speak to you because you haven't embarked on that. You haven't decided maybe how you want to do this. And so if that's you, it's really awesome that you have that space and time maybe to figure that out. And that's what I would say, right? Because we're saying that it doesn't mean being a doula doesn't mean one thing. It doesn't mean it looks the same way. It doesn't mean you even go to hospital births, for example, if that doesn't resonate with you. So the first step, I think, on the journey, if you have the luxury of feeling into it, is just that. What do I believe about birth? What have my own experiences been? And where am I really excited to serve women? How would that look? How would that feel? Again, not to, keep using the hospital analogy. I just know there are a lot of doulas out there who are not happy with that way of being a doula. Some are, and they do it for many years, and that's their sweet spot. But for a lot of women, it's not the place. They just haven't thought through what they really want to do. And that's the way that we practice midwifery. That's what we're offering the world in general to birth workers, is that they're only these words. What do they mean? We have to figure them out and follow our hearts. So if you're at the beginning, again, you might not even know right now, what does that look like? But again, looking at your own experience, for example, can be really helpful. So if you've had babies, what were your births like? What did you want? What did you not get? Working on that trauma, possibly that's there, and figuring that out first, because ideally you will function as the doula that you never had. I mean, that's how I feel about being a midwife, is like, I want to be the midwife that I wanted. And, not that I didn't get that either. Like, I have had that. And that's been so great to have reflected back to me by Margot. But, you want to be for someone what you would want. I think that's the natural order of things. So it's very misaligned when we find ourselves in situations where it's like, this is nowhere near what would be right for me. Right? Because we serve people from our hearts, and our hearts are our own experiences as we've processed them.
Yeah, and I think there's some really great comments over here. I'll read them for people who are on YouTube, or at least summarize them. Let's see. Not really loving the whole hospital scenario, but equally I want to give them the opportunity to have the most natural birth possible in the hospital. I have a lot to say about that comment. Let's see. Mia said, I like the prompt of what we would be excited to offer instead of an obligation of I should show up for every type of birth in person. Johnny said, flipping hate the hospital, but also currently supporting a lot of folks in hospital birth and recognize the necessity of support there. It's a conundrum. So taking a step back, yes, it is a conundrum, but only insofar as like, and not just speaking to you, Joni, but to the other comments too. And I'm sure a lot of people, I mean, we hear this all the time. it is true that people who are in the hospital need often the most support, but that doesn't mean that we have to be the people that give it to them, right? Like both those things can be true. Um, and so this is where I feel like we have to be really careful to not get into sort of like a savior role or like a martyr sort of role where it's like, well, they need the support and I could give it to them. And so I owe it sort of to the community to do this. That's fine if people want to do that for sure. And if that feels like a net positive at the end of the day, by all means. And like, I think it's, I have friends here in Duluth who do hospital birth, and they actually are starting a new program here where basically the hospital is subsidizing doulas, which is fascinating to me. And I'm very curious to see how that ends up going. And there's days where I'm like, man, if I didn't have these young kids, I'd be curious to do some doula support in that way and just get a peek into what's happening there, especially with people who come in sort of unprepared. But I feel like that would get old really fast. But that's not true for everybody. I don't know that I said all the things I was meaning to say there. I guess just the phrase most natural birth possible. When I hear that, I just have like alarm bells go off in my head. It's often what a lot of women say when they're sitting in a circle. And we talk about like their birth desires. Almost every single time I've been in a circle, especially of women who haven't done a whole lot of digging around what they truly want and what they really believe and doing that excavation work. That is the phrase a lot of them will say. I'm so and so, and I'm however many weeks pregnant, and I really want to have as natural birth as possible. And every single time I want to be like, well, what do you think is possible? Like, what do you mean as natural of a birth as possible? And who are you leaving that up to? Because at the hospital, they have a very different definition of what is possible in birth than a home birth midwife. And there's different kinds of home birth midwives, right? So like, just want to plant that seed for all of you too. If you're sitting with a woman and she tells you this is like a big neon sign that like she needs to think more about it and really, really do some digging to figure out, no, what do you actually want? Like, let's not just sort of like leave it up to fate fully, although yes, we have to surrender and we can't control birth, but like, what do you really want? I've found that those women aren't really willing to claim what they want. And they just sort of use this other phrase to keep it at an arm's length. So that's a side tangent, but in case that is a nugget of wisdom that is helpful, I wanted to share that.
There's so many ways to help. So I really want to challenge people on this subconscious idea of rescuing women from their experience. And I saw Amy, you said I'm a rescuer. I think that was you. Yeah. Right. So that's okay. You know that. But I think a lot of women getting into doula trainings haven't done that self-examination. And we can't save anyone from their experience, but there are different ways to help and to support them on that journey. Education being like the number one. So if you're someone that's like, but I have to, all these women and they need help. Yes, that may be true, but how are you the most effective? And going to hospital birth after hospital birth in certain places, I mean, we've all heard the stories. It's like banging your head against the wall. Like maybe one of those women wind up with a birth where nothing horrible happened, right? But a lot of women do, despite having a doula. So then you're just like, well, what's even the point? So pick a different place on the timeline to be effective. Maybe it's even after somehow, maybe it's in postpartum support. But, it would, of course, I think be an excellent idea to happen earlier on the timeline and educate women about their options. I mean, we've been teaching a free indie birth workshop for how many years now? Like 7 or 8 years or something. And that's not about midwifery. That's not like, oh, come to my workshop and hire me as a midwife. I don't care. Everybody comes that wants to come. It's free. We watch birth videos. We talk about how birth works. That's the place where people start to open up to, wow, I didn't know birth could look like that. Right? So we have to think about where else on the journey we can be most effective. That also feels good for us, because if we really feel like we need to help people, there's nothing wrong with that. But it does turn into a martyr situation. Like I said, if you keep putting yourself back into that same situation again, and things really aren't shifting, right? And I know many of us have felt that. So how else can we make change? And any of those things fall under the role of doula or sometimes midwife. It doesn't matter.
And I think someone brought up like financial security up top, and it's certainly a topic. Money is a topic I think a lot about, because it's another thing I'm doing coaching on. But I think one of the places that people get hung up about this is that, and this goes back to those preconceived notions with the card Marion pulled, there's this feeling like, well, the doula role is at least sort of being slightly more understood in most communities now as like a thing you pay X amount of money for this package. It's a viable sort of business model, I guess is what I'm saying. And I don't want to act like it wouldn't be more difficult, but there's this feeling like, well, how would I make this into a business or make this a viable like financial situation doing just the education piece or just the postpartum support piece, or some other really cool version of this that involves like spiritual counseling or shamanism or like all of these things that a lot of people are interested in. And we know that is what women actually need. Like, I feel pretty confident in saying that after however many years I've been doing this now. Like, that is what women actually need. They need someone to like guide them through that emotional and spiritual process of figuring out like who they are and finding their voice and figuring out what they really want in their life, and how their birth goes is a part of that, right? But like, that's what people need the most support with. And it seems like it takes quite a lot of time and effort and work, like you're saying, Marin, earlier on the timeline. But it's not a thing that people are familiar with, like paying for as a business model, right? No one's like, oh yeah, one of those like really cool doulas or whatever we want to call it, or birth preparation guide, like those people, and they charge this amount and we all are used to paying that or whatever. That's not happening yet. And so I think that it feels a little bit fuzzy and gray. But I just want to say that I think that that's where people really are needed, and that maybe collectively we can shift that, and again sort of release this belief that that would be hard to figure out, and just trust that if we can make it really clear to women, like, this is what you need, I think, probably. And if this resonates with you, like, please hire me for this. If we could do that, I think we could shift things so much more than just what sort of the mainstream modern doula movement has done, which is like, oh, just hire me and I'll come be your birth coach and we'll meet twice before the birth. Like, that is not enough for a person to undo 20 plus years of patriarchal bullshit. Like, it's just not. And so that's why a lot of doulas get really frustrated and burned out, is because they feel like, well, I did the things, right? Like, I did the couple appointments that I was taught to do with people, and then we get to the birth. And I'll give you this example that I did find from one of our midwifery school students who was at a birth this week as a doula. She said, basically the woman hadn't eaten in almost 12 hours and she was induced. There was like a whole bunch of other stuff too, but she hadn't eaten because the OB had put so much fear into her about aspiration in the event that she needed to go under general anesthesia for a cesarean. So that's like the party line is you can't eat in labor because then if you go under general anesthesia, you could throw up and then aspirate your own vomit and die. This has happened, I think, like one time ever since 1950. Like, I can't remember the exact statistics, but it's extremely uncommon. Like, it's theoretically possible, but it's like, okay, well, I guess a moose could come in my house and like ram me right now too. Like it's possible, but probably not gonna happen. Anyway, so this OB scared the shit out of this mom. And this doula was like, you need to eat, basically. She's like, do you want fruit? Do you want honey? You want cheese, yogurt, protein bar, applesauce, protein, fruit pouch? And the mom wouldn't eat any of it because the OB had said, you could aspirate, you cannot eat anything. And she's sitting there at 9 centimeters, like kind of stalled out for a bunch of hours. And the woman did end up having a C-section. And this doula was like, I'm so frustrated. And I said, yeah, that's why I have it in my contract that if you've gone more than 2 or 3 hours without eating, we transport. Like, I'm not willing to have that be part of my experience as a midwife. If I was a doula, it would be the same. It's like, if you're not willing to do the very basic stuff that you need to do, like eat food, put energy into your body so that you can finish the birth process, how on earth am I going to help you? How? Like, I'm not magical. I am magical, but I can't like harness the sun's energy and like put it in. I don't know. It was just like mind blowing to me that this woman was refusing to eat. And anyways, it was a great example of someone who said they wanted one thing, they hired a doula, they were doing the things, but then as soon as the medical system said otherwise, she fell in line with them. And that can be really frustrating as a doula to be in that position. And, you know, the way to avoid that is being really careful about who you work with, and then also doing all this work ahead of time with them to help them figure out what they really actually want so that you're not surprised then when it comes out, if at all possible. Joni said 1 in 40,000 is the number, I think, for aspiration. That sounds right. It's like very uncommon.
I feel like, Joni, your other expansion here on detailing some of your clients that advocacy was really helpful for is really beautiful. So I don't want anyone to think there is somehow a right way of doing this work. That's not at all what we're saying. We are generalizing because, I mean, I think we all know there are generalizations to be made about the medical system and all of that. But I don't think there's one path for everybody. So if you're in a role where you are feeling really effective in the ways that you've described, like, you know, women that would have probably had a C-section without your help, that's great. I don't think that needs to be stopped. I think we're our own barometers for this work in all cases. So, you know, are you settled in your own body and your own nervous system? Like, are you giving from a place that feels really genuine versus, you know, am I over giving for whatever reason, right? Like, am I in a martyr role? Like, only you can know the answer to those questions. So I think for each of us, that's really important to consider. And, you know, stepping into the role of midwife, that's also super relevant. Like, we too have to make choices. We don't take on every client, but we do take on some clients that maybe another midwife wouldn't take on, or vice versa, right? So we all need to just be so well, like, self-acquainted that we know what those answers are, because yeah, there is not one way, and there are probably a lot of women that are truly being helpful in that doula hospital situation, but only you know, because once like burnout starts to happen, once like, for some of us, and I'll speak for me, I feel like this would have been me. The amount of anger and resentment that probably would have started to come up for me in my own body would have made it something that I didn't want to do. So if that's not you and you're peaceful and happy in those roles, I say go for it.
Totally. And I guess the other thing that came to mind as you were saying that, Marin, is that I think there's different seasons and times too. Like I had kind of mentioned earlier, there's moments where my friend who's got a doula agency here, where I'm like, and I've even said to her, I'm like, hey, if I had really good on-call care, like, can I be a doula for your agency and like pop into somebody's birth? Like just because I'm curious and like I know I would be helpful and like be interesting to sort of be in that role again. And it sounds sort of fun, but I don't know that that would be a long-term thing, right? And also setting, right? Like there's two hospitals here where I live, and depending on who you ask, they have different positives and negatives about both of them. One of them's opening actually a midwife-led unit in their new building, which is really fascinating. And they're going to be doing water births. I haven't told you this yet, Marin.
Wow.
You're going to be offering water births, but everyone's like really scared about it. All the nurses are all like, oh, scary and weird. And what was my point? I guess my point is that like I have a doula friend. I haven't heard the full story, but she got kicked out of one of the hospitals for her really badass advocacy. And so I think she won't be going back to that one ever again. But the other place, might feel like it's worth going to for her, and so again, there's seasons and settings and in your own life, right? Like if you've got little kids or not little kids. And yeah, like I could see being a grandma someday and being like, oh yeah, why not go to some hospital births and just be as helpful as I can? Because I think even a bad doula, like even one who just sort of like rolls, like does whatever a doctor says they should be doing and is like in the corner, like probably is more helpful than having no one there. Like at least there's another body in the room who sort of cares about this woman. So yeah, I think, yeah, it's all just so interesting. But like you said, the burnout piece, it's like if you're going and you're angry and it's horrible, probably not the best thing to keep doing unless you can find a way to shift that.
Right. No right answer. There are so many women in the world having babies in all places that I don't think we should feel like we have to do anything. You should do what feels good to you and where you feel like you can make an impact. And, sometimes that's complicated. And like I'm saying, that can take a while to sort out. And maybe you learn the harder way in a sense and do something that really doesn't resonate. So you learn that way. I mean, you can't really screw it up. If you're open to learning, you're going to learn and you follow the signs. And if it's not right this way, then try something new and teach a class, right? See what comes of it. Because we never stop learning. There's only like a million billion things in the world like we don't know and things we might be interested in. So I find that really exciting. Like even as a midwife, I don't have to ever go to another birth again if I don't want to. And maybe I won't because I have a million other ideas of things that I would love to do to support women. So just really keep your options open.
There's this question over here that maybe is too big for today, or maybe not. Mia asks, Marin or Margot, do you have a way of checking in with yourself to know who to work with and when to say no? You did like a whole class, like just on that for Elevate, didn't you, Marin?
Yeah, and I feel like there are a couple of podcasts I've done on just kind of like choosing the right people for you. So you could look in the podcast archives and see if you can get close or email me or something, and I can try to help if you don't see them. But I've talked about it a lot because It's a huge question for midwives as well. It's huge. And no one completely has it figured out. I don't have it completely figured out, but I've learned a lot over the years. And, as you shift and change, honestly, the people that you'll attract shift and change. So it's just a matter of, figuring out again kind of what you want. And right, being able to say no is a huge part. So for some people, that's really hard, especially if you have this belief in your head that you're supposed to serve everyone. Go ahead and do that and see see how that works out. And a lot of people do for a long time.
I was trying to find a link. Do you remember what they're called? Those podcasts?
I really don't. I'd have to go back and look later. I don't even remember when they were for. But I have like a pretty lengthy screening process as well. So it's not just like, hey, let's talk on the phone. Are we going to work together? It's like there are many steps that I ask people to take. So even as a doula, I don't think that's crazy. If someone contacts you, figure out what your system is. I mean, of course, you have to know the kind of person you're looking for, but have materials you send back to them, have something for them to read so that they can also say, like, is this the right doula for me? And you guys can go back and forth and kind of figure it out, and eventually meet if it feels like the right match. But yeah, I don't understand the like, oh, you're a doula, like I'll hire you. Like they don't understand. They don't understand because that's not how it is in the medicalized world in most cases, right? Like you look in the whatever Google or phone book for an OB, you just pick one. Like women aren't used to like sifting and finding people that really align with what they want. So that would be a huge step if you're already a doula or a new doula in your community to figure out what makes you unique. There should be no competition. There should be none of that bullshit. Everyone's so different. The competition comes in when nobody is defining themselves by any unique way and everybody's just like the same. We're all doulas, so you got to figure out more than that about yourself. Right, exactly. Whoever accepts your insurance, that's the model women are used to. Of course, we know, right? It comes down to a personal match. How many of you have had doula clients that are just like perfect for you? And like maybe they become friends. They don't have to, right? But there are women that like, these are your people. How good does that feel? How many more women would you love to work with like that? And then the opposite, there are women that like, you just don't gel with, nothing personal, just doesn't work. So you got to figure out your process and be strong enough to say no in a very kind way. I don't think I'm the doula for you. I think there's someone better for you.
People have other questions in the chat?
Amy, I see your comment about what you state, so I'll read it. I specialize in home birth and free birth, but also happy to support hospital births too. Again, I don't think there's a wrong, but I think just thinking about what your intention with that is, if it's kind of like an afterthought or like, but I feel kind of bad, or, I don't know what's coming up for you. But if that's the way it's feeling, I would agree. Like maybe just cut that out, be really clear about who you are and what you're offering. And in our doula training, in our midwifery school, we have lots of like coaching around this kind of stuff. I mean, I guess it's called business. I don't know. I guess that's kind of the category it falls under. Paperwork and, having clarity and intention with your words. So you could also just try it, cut that part out, tell the universe that that's what you're willing to specialize in and see how things shift for you rather than just like having it be, more open like that, if that's not what you're really feeling.
Well, and I don't know that I even have a fully fleshed out thought here, so bear with me, everyone. But I feel like if someone does doula work for long enough, every single one of them says that exact same thing. They say I specialize in, or I prefer supporting, or I especially love supporting home birth and free birth, but I will do hospital births. And then a lot of them end up saying that they don't do hospital births after a while. So it's like just interesting to watch the evolution happen when people start out. Like I have a really, really, really lovely friend here who has not been to a birth yet, but she trained with us. And she's like, I don't think I'm gonna like going to hospital births, but I'm gonna try it and see. And like maybe I would be great in that setting. But she's just excited to go to births in general, right? So she's willing to kind of take on whatever. And she's like at the beginning of this thing. But every seasoned doula that I know says they prefer going to home births. And so that's the other piece that I find just fascinating, like on a community level, is like if every doula in your community prefers going to home births, why are all you fools still going to the hospital? And then hiring the doulas who all prefer home births. And so where's like the disconnect in the education happening? Because they're hiring these doulas who believe home birth is the best option for low risk women, at least. I think pretty universally they would agree. And somehow that's not translating. It's not like I want them to indoctrinate their clients with this belief, but it's just so interesting that like, and I've pointed this out to people when I teach classes to pregnant women. I'm like, why do you think all of the doulas prefer home births? Why? Because they see better outcomes. They see women being respected and like honored and their autonomy being preserved. So like, what more do we need to say? Like the people who are going to the most births in our community prefer home birth, except for the people who work at the hospital. So, but they've never been to a home birth, right? The people in the hospital have never been to a home birth. So how could they say? So the people who are seeing both prefer home. It's just really interesting. So not a fully fleshed out thought, but a little like a curiosity. It's something you can point out too to people in your community if it is true where you live, which it probably is.
We have two courses around being a doula, and maybe Margot, you can link. So we have the Indie Birth Doula Academy, which is our full-on like 4-month training, which many people here are in. And yeah, that's a great training. You can click the link and read more if you'd like to. We also have a shorter, less expensive course for women that aren't quite sure yet if they want to go down the doula path. And that's called Doula Dreams. And you could probably complete that course in a week. It's fairly simple, but many of the women that have gone through that, have been more clear. That was the point. They were more clear when they were done if they were wanting to do a doula training or not. So those are two things for you to check out. The podcast archives is where we house all of the 200 plus podcasts. They aren't all on the apps anymore because some of them are pretty old. So you see the link there. They're all in categories. I don't know that any of them are specifically about being a doula, but there are some with doulas.
I have 5 I'm going to put here that are business coaching sessions with doulas that I recorded with their permission, of course. So you can hear me giving business coaching like live with people, and most of them are graduates of our program. So there's some really good, they're like fun. I'm the kind of person who, if I'm going to listen to a podcast, which is actually really rare, I want it to be like an eavesdropping, like a voyeuristic weird one where I get to like hear people interacting and know about their lives. That's what I'm into. So there are 5, and I put all 5 of those over in the chat. But if you're listening on YouTube and go to the podcast archive page, just scroll around. It's under the birth, politics, and philosophy section, which I don't quite know why it's there, but they're all called badass business coaching for birth workers, and there's number 1 through 5. So you can also like find on the page the badass. You can search badass and it'll pop up. There might be another doula one too.
I love the question about the difference between a doula and a midwife, and perhaps we should have included that earlier in this conversation. We made some assumptions perhaps about, where people are at, which sometimes we do. So to be brief, I mean, there's a lot of overlap actually. So it is such a great question. This role of kind of like sister and friend and emotional support, I think is something that I see both doulas and midwives doing, at least in the way that I work as a midwife. Not all midwives are like that. The most defining difference is that midwives have extensive training into normal birth, pregnancy, and abnormal stuff as well, right? So a midwife, in theory, would be able to handle an emergency at home, like too much bleeding or a baby needing help breathing. And even during a pregnancy would be more educated to help a mom, let's say like with nutrition or even through lab work, right? So I hate to say medical. I hate to say the midwife is the medical person because I don't really believe that. But there's advanced training around normal and abnormal birth. So you can also email us at support@indiebirth.org if you're like wanting to know what step to take next. We have a wonderful assistant named Megan, and we have all kinds of other courses and things to try out. If you're somebody that's not quite sure which route to go, we're happy to help you figure that out.
Yeah, I would love to hear if anyone has like last minute questions, and if there's something we can't really cover in the last 5 minutes, we could certainly continue the conversation elsewhere. Or like Marion was saying, Megan is super helpful as well with that. Where does this leave you? Where have you gotten to here at the end of this hour with us? What questions are bubbling around in your brain?
What step are you ready to take on this full moon? You don't have to share that, just a question.
But if you want to, totally put it in the chat.
Becky, I see your question as well. And I think if you're already enrolled in the Doula Academy, I wouldn't do the Doula Dreams course. That's really for people that aren't quite sure if they're going to be a doula or do the Doula Academy. So I think you're good, but looking forward to seeing you in the fall when you begin. What's coming up for any of you? Anything you want to share? Anything that's been ignited, any thought or feeling that you're like, okay, like next step or not next step. I have this thing to work out first. Like where are you at?
People are welcome to unmute themselves here at the end too, if they wish.
Being all over the place is an acceptable answer. Always. So not that you're looking for a suggestion with that, but jot down some things, maybe ideas or thoughts or feelings you've had in this hour, and just take some time this weekend or whenever. Just take some time. It can be a lot to sort through. And I know we throw a lot of things at people that are confronting in some ways. Any questions? Eric, I see your message, and that's exciting. I'm coming to Hawaii in August for quite a while, so maybe we'll meet up, but you can email us at support@indiebirth.org for more information on that and the school.
What part of Hawaii are you coming to?
We're going to be on Oahu for a while.
Oh, nice. I live on Maui, so not too far.
Okay. Well, we should connect, because it would be fun to get around and visit, or, just meet as many people around as we can. So that would be really cool.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. We don't have a ton of time, but I see the question about believing in home birth and being concerned about there not being midwives in the area. I don't have the magical answer, except we hear that a lot, and I see that you're in Botswana, and I of course don't know what the scenario is there. But I guess it's always a plug, not necessarily for our school, although I think our school's great, but for creating more midwives around the world for sure. That is a problem. That's why we started the school and why we have students all over. So you could maybe feel into that and think about if that's the right path for you. Well, Kylie, that's cool. I'm sure there's so many like indie birth community people that I hope I have the chance to meet while we're there. So connect. Feel free to email me.
I can quickly answer this one from Becky. How many hours per week do most of your doula students spend during the 4 months of the academy? People spend typically between 5 and 8 hours a week is what we hear. So, an hour a day most days, and then that should be plenty. But it depends, of course, on like how fast of a reader you are and that sort of thing. There's some books to read and lots of videos to watch and projects and all sorts of great content, but that's typically what people report.
So to wrap up on the Sagittarius moon, my basic understanding, at least, I'm no astrologist, is just that this is a really powerful moon to manifest and set intentions. So we've talked about a lot today, and sometimes it can feel, right, like there's a lot to figure out in your brain. And that's not wrong. Maybe you want to write some of those things down. But for the sake of whatever moon energy might be with us, it's also a really powerful time to just dream. And I think we don't do enough of that, right? Because we always call ourselves back with some reason, some excuse. And they might be valid in the world. Like, I get it. I'm not saying that we don't have to think about money, for example. I too have to think about money, but for the sake of this moon, what if you could really just dream? And whether that's going down the doula path, the midwife path, whatever, what would it feel like to be in that role in a way that you were so excited about, that when the phone rang and you were meeting with women, you were just like over the moon that you got to do this? What if you just set that for this moon and see what happens? And then you can go back to your scheming, planning brain that needs to figure all the things out. But there's no harm in that. Like no bad thing is going to come to you for this weekend for not trying to work out the details of how it's possible. So we might not know how it's possible, but all things are possible. So what if we just planted that seed? And yes, thank you, Kylie. The Gemini sun about networking and new ideas. So yes, it truly is a time to dream. Even this morning, I'll just share, my husband and I were on a walk, and I don't even know where it came out of, but he was like, we should just figure out how to buy a house in Italy someday. He's like, do you know you can buy a house in Italy for like $1? Anyway, my ancestry is Italian, so it's been on my mind lately. But just something like that. He doesn't normally say things like that. So like the spark is there, is my point. The spark is there to come up with your crazy ideas this weekend and see what lands. So that's my assignment for all of us.
The phrase that I saw from someone, I can't remember which astrologer or where at this point, but for the new moon was to figure out just where to point your arrow. Just, which I really liked. And it's totally all of those things too.
Yeah.
I'm curious, Erica, do you want to share more? You said, is there ever an opportunity to work with either one of you? In what capacity? Because yes, there is. Probably.
Well, I'm doing a retreat there. I'm doing a retreat on Oahu for aspiring midwives in October. So if you haven't seen that link,
I'll post it.
that's one thing you could check out. But
No, I'm just like in the student role, like attending the school. Is there ever just an opportunity just to work with you guys, train directly? This was just, I was just curious because I know you don't link us with preceptors. Fortunately, I have one right now here on Maui, but I want the opportunity to work with different midwives. But I'm just so intrigued and inspired by the way you guys work. I would just curious for the opportunity.
Yeah, for students in our indie birth midwifery school, I mean, I guess there's more of a chance than, we obviously have people messaging us all the time. And that's always my first question, like, are you planning on enrolling in the school? Because yeah, we don't have capacity beyond that. Perhaps, especially, I don't know how long I'll be in Hawaii. I don't know what I'll be doing. So perhaps, yeah, perhaps.
And not to get into a whole thing, but that has been part of the vision with the Indie Birth Sanctuary, is creating a space where people can come birth and students can come apprentice in the model that we're talking about, because it's pretty hard to find those opportunities. And but for example, I had somebody recently asking me if I knew of places, one of our midwifery school students asking me if I knew of places that were taking apprentices, like short-term placements. And that's something that I did during my apprenticeship, which is, I think, why she asked me. And I said, well, if I had a bunch of births in a certain month or across a couple months, like, I'm not opposed to having people come, work with me in that way. But Mira and I both are sort of low loads or no loads at the moment in a lot of months. So, but yeah, just putting out there that that's something I'm open to, is for students who are in the school.
Lastly, it doesn't look like a clickable link. I have a knack for that, but social.indiebirth.org is our free platform. So if you're not there, we'd love for you to join. That's where the doula program happens. That's where the school happens. And even if you aren't in either of those things, you can join for free and connect. So like, I see a message about, are you here? Are you there? Join the platform and see who's around you. And we hang out there too.
There
Yeah.
are some people who are in Washington who are in our school, and that's a place that I have thought about moving to as well.
All right. Well, thank you for being here talking about doula stuff. I'm not sure what the topic is for the next circle, but we do these every new and full moon. So we'll see you back here in about 2 weeks at, I don't know what time and I don't know what day, but it's going to
We'll be
be
here.
out there. We'll be there. I'll be there no matter what it is. And I wish you a beautiful weekend and happy full moon. Have a great day, everybody, or night. Bye.